I have to admit something that still makes me laugh at myself a little. For years, and for a good part of my gardening life, I grew peas exactly the way everyone told me to grow peas. I followed the seed packet like it was a sacred instruction manual. I made a neat little furrow in the soil, about an inch deep. I dropped the seeds in one by one, spaced them carefully, covered them up, watered them, and walked away feeling like I had done everything correctly. And honestly, why would I question it? That was how the books described it. That was how older gardeners talked about it. That was how the diagrams showed it. A straight row, tidy spacing, a little support if you felt ambitious, and then you waited for the harvest. But every year, the same thing happened. By late spring or early summer, I would be out there in the garden, bent over with my knees in the dirt, try to pick peas from sad, thin vines that never looked anything like the picture on the packet. The plants flopped. The pods were smaller than I hoped. Some vines turned yellow too early. Some got mildew. Some simply gave up before they had really done anything impressive. And after all that waiting, all that watering, all that garden space, I would end up with a harvest that felt almost insulting. A few meals, maybe enough to freeze a little if the season was kind. But nothing that made me feel like peas were worth the space they were taking up. For a long time, I thought that was just the nature of peas. Delicious, yes. Worth growing, maybe. Productive, not really. Then I saw something that completely changed the way I thought about them. A few years ago, I was visiting a family in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. If you have never been through that part of the country in late spring, it has a kind of quiet beauty that stays with you. The fields are green, the gardens are carefully kept, the farmhouses sit back from the road, and every now and then you hear the sound of a horse and buggy coming around a bend before you actually see it. I had stopped by to visit a woman named Emily. She had a large family, a very full household, and a garden that was not nearly as big as you would expect for the amount of food it produced. Her garden was practical, organized, and alive in that way that only a well-used garden can be. Nothing was there just to look pretty. Every foot of soil had a purpose. We were walking through the beds when we came to her peas. And I stopped, not because the peas looked good, because they looked impossible. This was not a row of peas. It was a living wall, a thick, bright green wall of vines climbing up a handmade trellis of twigs and twine. The vines were so dense that I could barely see through them. And hanging all over that wall were pods. Not a few pods here and there. Pods everywhere. Fat pods, glossy pods, pods tucked behind other pods, pods hanging in clusters like the plants had decided to show off. The whole planting was only a narrow strip along the base of the trellis. It was not a huge bed. It was not some fancy setup. It was just a small, dense, vertical patch of peas. I remember asking her how many plants she had put in there. She smiled like she already knew I was not going to believe the answer. She said there were probably around 150 plants growing in that little space at the base of the trellis. I thought I had misunderstood her. Everything I had ever read told me peas needed space. They needed air. They needed room. If you crowded them, they would compete with each other, weaken each other, and invite disease. That was the rule I had carried around in my head for years. But Emily's peas had clearly not read that rule. A few weeks later, I heard what she had harvested from that little patch, and that was the moment I knew I had to rethink everything. From a strip of soil that most gardeners would barely notice, she had harvested more peas than I used to get from long traditional rows. That visit taught me something very simple and very uncomfortable. I had not been failing because I was lazy. I had not been failing because peas were naturally disappointing. I had been failing because I was using the wrong system. The old method treated each pea plant like an individual that needed its own little territory. Emily's method treated peas like a community. And once you see peas that way, the entire crop starts to make more sense. Peas are not tomatoes. They are not peppers. They do not want to stand alone in proud little circles of bare soil. Peas are climbers. They are joiners. They reach, cling, lean, twist, and support each other. When you give them the right structure and plant them generously, they do not collapse into chaos. They rise together. That is the heart of this method. You're not planting a row. You're building a pea wall. The first thing that matters is the soil, and this starts earlier than most people expect. The best version of this method begins in the fall before planting. Emily and her husband build a raised strip where the trellis will go. It is not a complicated raised bed with expensive lumber or a special kit. It is simply a long mound of rich growing material, about 2 feet wide and several inches high. Into that mound, they layer aged manure, finished compost, and native garden soil. The manure is old, not fresh and hot. The compost is dark and broken down. The garden soil brings in the local mineral base and the living biology already adapted to that place. The important thing is that they do not fuss with it too much. They do not turn it into a perfect manufactured mix. They layer it, shape it, and let winter do the work. Rain settles it. Frost opens it. Worms move through it. Microbes wake up and spread. By spring, the bed has become loose, rich, and alive. If you're starting in spring and you did not prepare in fall, you can still do a modified version. Use good compost, aged manure if you have it, in your native soil. Mix lightly, not aggressively. Peas like fertile soil, but they do not need to be spoiled with heavy feeding. They need a cool, moist, living place where their roots can settle quickly. The second thing is the planting pattern, and this is where most gardeners have to take a deep breath and ignore their instincts. Do not plant one neat little line. Plant a band. Imagine your trellis running down the center. On each side of that trellis, you mark a narrow strip. Into those strips, you press the pea seeds close together in a grid. The seeds are spaced only a couple of inches apart in every direction, side to side, front to back, all along the trellis. When you first do this, it feels wrong. It feels too crowded. It feels wasteful. It feels like you're setting the plants up for trouble. But that is because we're used to thinking of plant spacing only as competition. We imagine each plant fighting for light, water, and nutrients. With peas, especially climbing peas, density can become support. The plants find the trellis, find each other, and begin moving upward as a mass. The key is that they must go vertical. Dense peas on the ground are a mess. Dense peas on a strong trellis are a crop. Before planting, soak the seeds overnight in lukewarm water. Not for days, just long enough to wake them up and help them swell. If you have pea inoculant, use it. It is inexpensive and helps introduce the bacteria that peas use to fix nitrogen through their roots. You do not have to make this complicated. A small amount goes a long way. Plant the soaked seeds about 1.5 inches deep. Cover them gently. Water them in well. Then leave them alone until they emerge. And plant early. This is one of the biggest mistakes people make with peas. They wait until gardening feels comfortable. They wait until the air is soft, the mornings are pleasant, and the soil is warm enough that they actually enjoy being outside. By then, the peas are already losing time. Peas are a cool season crop. They do not need summer warmth to begin. In fact, summer warmth is what eventually pushes them toward decline. They want to start while the soil is still cool. They can handle chilly mornings. They can handle that raw, early spring feeling that makes you want to go back inside for another cup of coffee. Emily plants when the soil can be worked, not when the weather feels perfect. When the bed is thawed, workable, and ready, the peas go in. The third thing is the trellis, and this is where a lot of people accidentally limit their harvest before the plants even sprout. Most pea supports are too short and too weak. A few sticks and a little netting might be fine for a casual row, but this method needs a real structure. You are asking a dense wall of vines to climb, hold pods, handle rain, and stand through wind. Build the trellis like you expect it to carry weight, because it will. A good trellis should be tall, taller than you think. 5 feet is not excessive. 6 feet is even better for vigorous vining varieties. The posts need to be firm in the ground. The cross pieces need to hold. The climbing surface can be simple. Twine, natural fiber, wire, branches, or mesh can all work. What matters is that the peas have many places to grab. Small openings are better than wide gaps. Pea tendrils need contact. They want to touch something, curl around it, and keep climbing. If the trellis is too open, the vines wander and tangle. If it gives them regular points of contact, they move upward with surprising discipline. The fourth thing is variety. This method is not for short little bush peas that were bred to be harvested quickly in fields. You want tall, climbing, old-fashioned varieties. You want peas that have the genetic ambition to reach upward. A tall-shelling pea, such as tall telephone, also known as alderman, is ideal. It can climb beautifully, produce heavily, and keep going if the conditions stay cool enough. Other tall heirloom types can also work well. The important thing is to choose a true vining pea, not a dwarf bush type. Bush peas are convenient, but they are not built for this style. Put them into a dense vertical system, and they often disappoint. They do not climb with the same energy. They do not fill the trellis the same way. They are not the star of this method. The fifth thing is mulch, and this is not optional. When you pack many pea plants into a small footprint, moisture becomes serious. Those roots are sharing the same narrow bed. The plants are growing fast. The leaves are breathing. The flowers are forming. Pods are filling. If the soil dries out, the whole system suffers. As soon as the plants are a few inches tall, mulch the base with clean straw. Not hay, because hay often brings weed seeds. Straw, a thick enough layer to shade the soil, hold moisture, and keep the roots cool. Cool soil is everything with peas. The air can warm up, but if the root zone stays cool and evenly moist, the plants keep producing longer. Mulch is your protection. It slows evaporation. It reduces soil splash. It keeps the base of the planting clean. It also makes the whole bed easier to manage. Water deeply, not nervously. A little sprinkle on the surface does not help much. You want the moisture to reach down into the root zone. In normal weather, a deep watering a couple of times a week may be enough. In a hot stretch, you may need more. The point is consistency. Peas do not like to swing between dry stress and sudden soaking. Once the vines begin to climb, you need to guide them a little. Not a lot. This is not delicate work. You're not tying every stem like a florist. You're simply encouraging the young vines to find the trellis and move upward. Every couple of mornings, take a minute to tuck wandering shoots back into the structure. If a vine tries to lean out and grab a neighboring crop, redirect it. If a section starts to sag, lift it gently and give it something to hold. This small attention early on prevents a lot of trouble later. The goal is a vertical wall, not a pile, not a nest, a wall. Once the peas begin flowering, the patch becomes almost magical. The flowers appear tucked into the green, and the first pods form. At first there are only a few, and then suddenly they seem to be everywhere. The more you pick, the more the plants are encouraged to keep producing. Pick often. Do not wait until every pod is oversized and tired. For shelling peas, harvest when the pods are full but still bright and tender. For snap peas, harvest while they are crisp and sweet. A pea plant that is allowed to mature too many pods begins to think its job is done. A pea plant that is picked regularly keeps trying. Now, here's the part that surprised me most. For years, I assumed pea season ended when the vines slowed down in heat. The plants would start looking tired, the pods would become less frequent, and I would pull them out. I thought that was just the end. But Emily's mother-in-law, Martha, had a different habit. Martha was an older Amish woman with the kind of hands that tell you she has worked every day of her life. She was quiet, sharp-eyed, and not especially impressed by complicated garden theories. When I complained that my peas always quit too early, she told me what she did. Once the peas begin to flower, she gives them a deep drink of cold water in the evening, once a week. That is it. Cold water, poured slowly along the base of the trellis after the sun is off the bed. She called it giving the peas their evening tea. At first, I thought it sounded too simple to matter. But the more I paid attention, the more sense it made. Peas do not only respond to air temperature. They respond strongly to root temperature. When the root zone gets too warm, pod production slows down. The plant starts shifting out of that cool, spring rhythm. A deep evening watering with cold water cools the soil around the roots. Because it happens in the evening, the sun is no longer beating down and immediately reheating the bed. The cool moisture carries through the night and into the next morning. You're not changing the weather. You're protecting the root zone just enough to extend the season. When I tried it, I noticed the difference. The plants stayed productive longer. They did not look young forever, of course. Nothing does. But they kept flowering. They kept setting pods. They gave me extra harvests at the point when I used to assume they were finished. That one habit changed my relationship with peas almost as much as the dense planting did. What I love about this method is that it is not fancy. There is no special product at the center of it. No expensive system. No miracle faire la hacer. No complicated schedule printed on glossy paper. It is observation. It is timing. It is structure. It is understanding what peas already want to do and then helping them do it better. They want cool soil. So you plant early, mulch well, and water deeply. They want to climb. So you give them a tall, strong trellis. They want contact. So you plant them close enough that they rise as a community. They want steady picking. So you harvest often and keep them producing. That is the whole idea. And once you understand it, the traditional single row starts to look strangely inefficient. A long row spreads the plants out, exposes the soil, lets vines flop, and makes you work harder for less food. A dense trellised band concentrates fertility, moisture, support, and harvest into a small space. It also changes the way the garden feels. Instead of crawling along the ground looking for scattered pods, you stand in front of a green wall and pick at eye level. Instead of sacrificing a long stretch of bed, you use vertical space. Instead of watching peas collapse into mildew and mess, you keep them lifted into the air. Will every gardener get the same harvest Emily gets? No. Soil matters. Variety matters. Weather matters. Timing matters. Experience matters. But even if you do not hit the kind of numbers that make people stop and stare, you can still dramatically improve what you get from a small space. Start small. Do not turn your entire garden over to this method the first time. Build one sturdy trellis. Prepare one rich strip of soil. Choose one tall vining variety. Plant generously. Mulch carefully. Keep the vines moving upward. Water deeply. Pick often. Give them that cold evening soak once they begin to flower. Then watch. You may find, as I did, that peas are not disappointing at all. They were simply waiting for the right conditions. And there is something satisfying about that. Something almost humbling. The plant did not need us to control every inch of its life. It needed us to stop forcing it into a pattern that did not suit it. That is the lesson I took from Emily's garden. Sometimes productivity does not come from doing more. It comes from arranging things better. Sometimes the answer is not more space. It is better use of the space you already have. And sometimes the old packet instructions are not wrong exactly, but they are far too cautious. They give you a way to grow peas. They do not always give you the best way to grow peas. If you have only ever grown peas in a thin row and felt underwhelmed, try this. Give them height. Give them company. Give them cool roots. Give them a reason to climb. You might be shocked by what a small patch can do. Because when peas are grown like a wall instead of a row, they stop behaving like a minor spring crop and start behaving like one of the most generous plants in the garden.